So welcome everybody to the Teaching Kitchen here at New York-Presbyterian Hudson Valley Hospital. My name is Emily. Today I'm going to be teaching you a little bit about preserving the bounty of summer. Don't know if you are aware that today is the last day of summer, the first day of fall. I guess it depends on which way you look at it. But I heard at 3:21 the seasons change. I imagine that all of the leaves will suddenly be golden, but certainly doesn't work that way. So welcome. If this is your first time joining us, very nice to meet you and have you here. You can put any questions you have in our chat box. I think Alita already got that started. Alita is our volunteer moderator today. Thank you, Alita, for leading our moderating services. and to everyone else who is joining me again, welcome back. Very glad that you're coming back for some more healthy tips and recipes and things to kind of keep inspired and definitely preserve the flavors of summer. So I think this is the best time of year for produce right now. It's, peppers, tomatoes, zucchinis, tons and tons of herbs. I just dug up the potatoes with our volunteers from the garden yesterday. We harvested garlic. We have a lot of really wonderful things coming out of our organic garden here. And if you don't have your own garden that you're harvesting from, hopefully you have made it to a farmer's market this season. It's one of the most abundant years that I can remember. So here's how we're going to kind of capture that abundance and be able to enjoy it all winter long when we are longing for the golden rays of summer to grace us again. So here's how we get ready for that. So we're going to be making 3 recipes today. The very first one is a tomato coulis. So coulis is a little bit more liquid than a sauce, but you can use it the same way that you might use the sauce. And it takes a little bit less time. You don't have to boil the tomatoes down as long. I included this recipe because it's the same recipe, and with it you can make 3 things. You can make the coulis, which I'm going to show you how to do that first. You can make a sauce from the very same recipe. You just push it through either a food mill or you push it through a sieve, and then after it's blended, you kind of do that straining process, and then you just place it in a pot and simmer it for another 30 minutes. Or you can make your own tomato paste, which is really a wonderful way to concentrate those flavors. So you can make 3 things with this recipe, which is one of the reasons that I really, really like it. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to go ahead and make our golden summer soup. And we're going to be using our very own summer squash for this. This is half. I used the other half yesterday. I have another one over here. And this one is a special kind of summer squash. Can't remember the name of the one with the 2 colors, but it's really beautiful if you can have a look at that. And you could use zucchini for this as well. It just wouldn't be the same color because zucchinis are green, so it won't be golden. But soup, of course, is a great way to preserve all of your summer produce, is turn it into soup. And you can enjoy it in winter when it's cold and have something to kind of support you through that season. We're also adding some garlic cloves, some fresh tarragon. Instead of the scallions, I'm going to use chives from the garden and an onion as well. So it's a pretty simple soup. You can either put a little bit of cream or whole milk if you want to kind of make it creamy, or coconut milk. But I did include a note that if you're freezing it, I would blend the soup without the cream or the coconut milk and freeze that, and then thaw it out. And then when you're ready to enjoy it, add the cream or the coconut milk to it, blend it again, and then enjoy it. Just because sometimes cream and coconut milk or dairy, they get a little funky when they're frozen. Even if they're blended in a soup, sometimes I've had textural issues. So just to avoid any risk of that, and then of course those are optional ingredients. So you can make this just with the veggies. This recipe calls for chicken broth, but you can use vegetable as I have here. Either one is fine. And the chicken and the tarragon and the zucchini, like those flavors go really well together, but the vegetable is good too. And then I had to include an herb sauce. So this is extremely versatile. It uses a bunch of herbs. And I'm hoping we'll have a little time. I can take you all out into the garden with me and show you our herbs because they are abundant. So I really like this one too because you can blend everything up, super, super simple. And then, as I mentioned here, you can enjoy it over roasted vegetables, steamed green beans, a cut of cooked meat or tofu or cooked fish. It's very versatile, as the as the title implies. So I want to start by just showing you what I've done with our tomatoes so far. And of course, tomatoes are, these are tomatoes from, some of them are from the garden, some are from the farmer's market. So you can see I have done up to step 5. So I preheated the oven to 350 degrees. I greased this baking pan. Then I arranged the tomatoes. They were all face up. On step 3, you'll see it says distribute the garlic cloves between them. Add thyme and oregano. I like this recipe because it uses a lot of thyme and oregano. And that's pretty much it. A little bit of vinegar. We are using balsamic today. A pinch of salt, a pinch of sugar. And that's it. This has been roasting slowly for about an hour. And this is what it looks like after roasting for an hour. You get all of these kind of juicy, softened tomatoes. Now I'm going to flip them back over. So they started face up, and I'm going to flip them now face down. And they're just going to roast for another 20, 30 minutes or so. All right, and these herbs are starting to, I didn't even bother picking the herbs. As you can see, they're fully on their little branches because it's easier to do that. Once they're cooked, it'll be really easy to pull the stems out. So if anybody has any things that they are making, recipes that they're making to kind of preserve the flavors of summer, if anyone wants to share those in the chat, I feel like we always get great inspiration from each other and our community. So these have now been flipped over, and we're going to put these back in just for another 20, 30 minutes or so. If you're following along, we are on step 5, so an additional 30 minutes. Okay. Questions about that so far? There are so many wonderful things you can do with tomatoes. It's really hard to choose one. So
yeah, no questions yet, Chef Emily. Oh wait, one came in. So Denise says she has loads of cherry-sized tomatoes, different sizes.
yeah.
She imagines that is much more work. How can she make use of them?
Yeah.
First?
So if you wanted to make this recipe and you wanted to use the cherry tomatoes, I wouldn't cut each one in half and roast them face up. First of all, the cherry tomatoes are so small. They have a lot of, they have like more skin per square inch. So I think you could just put them on a sheet pan, follow the same steps, but just put them whole on the sheet pan and roast them. And they'll start to split and open up and bubble on their own. So you don't have to really do anything to them. Yeah. Good question, Denise. Thank you.
Great question.
All right, so we're going to start with our next recipe here, which is the golden summer soup, if you're following here. And I'm going to start by getting our onion ready. This is a very generous recipe because you can just kind of rough chop everything, put it into the pot, and not really stress about, oh, my onion dice isn't exactly at a 1/4 inch across, and woe is me, right? This is very, very simple with soups, especially if you're going to blend them. You just kind of rough chop, goes in the pot, and there you have it, right? So here's our onion. I'm now cutting it, it's face down, cutting it into quarters. So I have 4 pieces. I'm going to cut across so I have slightly smaller pieces, right? So you have this kind of nice chunky dice. We'll start with, oh, I already poured my olive oil. Start with the olive oil in the pot. You can use butter if you want for this soup. This has a little bit of a French flair. I think I was channeling my ancestors with this soup. I think the French flair is like that you can use a little butter. You can, the tarragon is definitely a very French herb. I think that there's a lot of tarragon in French cuisine, which I love. It does have a little bit, if you've never used tarragon before, this is what it looks like. It has a little bit of like a licorice-y flavor. So if you're kind of like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to like that, well, give it a try. But if you really think, oh, no, that's not for me, you can use a different herb. I think parsley is really nice in this. I've also used basil is fantastic in this soup as well. So feel free to kind of mix up, different herbs depending on what you like. So we're going to start sauteing that. We're going to get the squash in there. I'm going to put a few of these, and I'll show you how to break this big squash down. So this one I already kind of worked at yesterday a little bit, but I'm going to show you how to do the really big one here. So these were grown here in our organic garden at the hospital, and I'm very lucky to have a group of wonderful volunteers that support the garden. We meet every week. We work at it together. And one of the hospital's initiatives is actually to donate a lot of the produce that we grow to CHOP, which is the Caring for the Hungry and Homeless at Peekskill. So it's a really nice kind of partnership that we have with them. They come and pick up the fresh produce. We get to grow it and use some of it in the classes, as well as in our Soups and Sides program, which we do every week. I cook up the produce from the garden and deliver it to the cancer center, where patients can enjoy a nice warm soup while they're being treated. So this is a squash, again, that we grew here. And I just took the top and bottom off. And I'm going to go ahead and cut down the middle just to check out the seeds, because this one feels a little tough. So you can see some of these seeds look a bit fibrous, right? So I'm going to go ahead and scoop those out. This is what happens when you leave for a vacation or something, and then you come back and your squash is like 6 times bigger than when you left it. You thought, oh, it's just a little baby squash. It's not going to grow that much, but grow they do. So get ready. There are definitely stories that I've heard of people and their unwanted zucchinis, leaving them on the doorstep for a neighbor or something like that. I always thought that was really funny. Just kind of zucchinis appearing all over the neighborhood this time of year. All right, so we took out kind of the tougher seeds. Let's put those in our compost. And then we have the rest of this we're going to chop up and put in the soup. So if you're worried that your skin is too, tough, you could go ahead and peel it and still use a lot of the flesh. This one feels okay. I don't think it feels like it's going to be too hard to cook down. Also, we're going to pass it through that really tough Vitamix blender, so it's going to break down, fairly completely. This recipe calls for 2 large summer squashes or zucchini. I would go ahead and say that this is the equivalent of 2 large. So let's go ahead and, put an asterisk next to that. I guess it depends on how large is your large, but this is definitely the equivalent of 2 for this recipe. So I really like making soups because it's, again, a nice way to kind of bottle up the flavors of summer. Usually what I do to preserve it is after I blend it, I cool it down. And I like to buy a bunch of those little pint containers that you get, at a takeout restaurant or something like that. I find that those are really easy to stack. So I buy those, fill them up. Don't fill them up all the way, because as liquids freeze, they expand. So you want to leave a little bit of space so that it can, freeze without breaking the container. And then you label it. So they do have like a freezer tape. Those tapes that it's kind of like a masking tape that that'll help, actually stick to the container. Because sometimes, you put just regular tape on it or writing on it, and it rubs away when it gets frozen and things like that. So you can go out and look for the freezer tape. We're going to go ahead and put some garlic in. So we do want to cook this for 5-10 minutes or so until it gets a little more tender, but I'm going to kind of speed things along. All right, let's pop the lid on there. That'll help it soften, kind of steam it as it's cooking. So we're going to go ahead and press our garlic cloves. This, again, is a great way to use up your garlic from the garden, right? You can go ahead and peel that. I swear, these garlic cloves from the garden they're really hard to crack open. It's like you can really just press down on them and they barely budge. But I think I'm getting it. So do we have anybody in our audience that wants to share what you're making to preserve flavors of summer? maybe you're making a sauce, maybe you're making, you know, tell us what you're making to savor these flavors. All right, we're trimming this up. Go ahead and add this to the pot. So again, just a little rough chop on the garlic. And then with the tarragon, lovely, lovely herb, really fragrant. You don't want to use the stems. The stems are, you know, the soft part of the stem maybe is okay, but the really tough kind of woody part at the bottom, try to avoid putting that in because it's going to be a little too tough for the soup, and it doesn't have that much flavor. Most of the flavor is really in the leaves. So we've got our tarragon stripped here, ready to go. We have a little bit of turmeric that we're adding to this. This is going to be a nice kind of immune booster and health supporter in the winter too. Nice warming spice. And then instead of our scallions, I mentioned we're going to use chives. So you can see how I wrapped these in a little damp paper towel. So now I can unwrap them and they look very, very fresh. These are from the garden, so they are very, very fresh. But if you're, you know, bringing them from the store, then it's a good way to kind of preserve them. So I'm going to go ahead and chop this and check in with our audience. Alita, what do we have so far?
So there is a question from E. She wants to know if squashes freeze well.
Yeah, so I think the squashes freeze really well, but they have to be cooked. You can't like put them in the freezer just raw. You'd have to cook them in some way, shape, or form. Even if you were just to, you know, blanch them and put them in the freezer, that would be fine. Just it's going to get mushy, which is why it works well as a soup, right? So either as a soup or something that maybe you're going to add it to like mashed potatoes, kind of make a puree with it. I think just keep that in mind. They freeze well as long as the next step for them is in some kind of a pureed mashed form.
Joan states that she makes gazpacho.
Oh, yeah, gazpacho is a wonderful way to, although I've never frozen gazpacho, Joan. It never usually makes it to the freezer. Let us know if you're freezing your gazpacho and how that works out. I'm really curious.
And
all right, anything else?
Denise has a tip. She says that when freezing the containers, using the plastic containers you mentioned, that adds a layer of plastic wrap on top of the homemade, you know, tomato sauce. So when they pull off the lid, it's easier.
Oh, that's a cool idea. I never tried that.
She feels that it might help with the freezer burn as well.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, good idea. I like that, Denise. I'm gonna try that out. Thank you. All right, so we're ready for our next step. We have our onions, we have our squash, everything's starting to soften a little bit. So let's add that garlic in there, our turmeric, beautiful. This is gonna make it super golden. Our tarragon, what else? Our scallions, or in our case, our chives, whichever you're using is fine. The chives are gonna make the soup maybe a little bit greener than the scallions might, but that's okay. And then you can use your chicken broth or vegetable broth, or you can even just use water. Just make sure you're just using water to add some salt. We haven't added any salt to this yet because even though this vegetable broth is low sodium, let me read to you how much salt is in the low sodium vegetable broth. I'm always very surprised by this. So you can see here on the box, low sodium, and it says 120 milligrams per serving. So it's 5% per serving. And then for the whole box, it's going to be 20%, right? I mean, you're not drinking the whole box, obviously, but there's a little more salt in these low. It's not no sodium, it's low sodium. So, you know, keep that in mind as you are preparing this dish or any dish that, you know, requires vegetable broth. Okay. I have a little bit of a lemon here, and if you're following, I'm on step 3 now. We're going to add the lemon juice in here as well. And then we're done. We can just set this, forget about it for a little bit, let it cook and simmer down, and that will make a beautiful golden summer soup. It'll be bright and yellow for those dark, dreary days of winter, bringing some cheer into our homes. You can see I really like summer. I really like summer. I really like fall too, though. I have to say, the change in weather, the cool, crisp air, there's really something quite magical about fall as well. Okay, my friends. Anything else before we move on to our next recipe?
Yes, so Valerie says that when she has a lot of cherry tomatoes, she likes to saute them in olive oil with minced garlic and lime zest until they burst.
Yes.
And then she freezes them and uses them with pasta or a side dish to a protein dish.
Valerie, thank you so much for sharing that. I remember when you made that for me once in the past, and it was one of the best things I've ever tasted. So thank you for sharing that with everyone. I love the addition of the lime zest with the tomato because it's so bright and fresh and kind of unexpected. So excellent. Thank you.
She also makes fruit compote and then she freezes that as well. So she keeps that summer going.
Yes, you got to. You got to. Yeah, that's really inspiring. And especially, you know, this time of year, you can just find the end of some peaches, maybe some plums around. Definitely apples are starting. So we'll be doing some more fall kind of dishes in the upcoming weeks. But yeah, go ahead and cook that down and freeze it. And then you can add it to your oatmeal in the morning. You can, you know, even have it on toast instead of like a jam or with a little bit of yogurt as a dessert. It's really a nice way to incorporate some fruit and some of the flavors. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
There's one last question about the, I guess, drying or using rosemary. Denise says she has a lot of it. And she would like to know how she can handle that, process that, I guess.
Beautiful. Yes. And part of this class, I really want to hear from all of you in what you have in your gardens and help you think about, you know, what to do with it. So in your packets, I think it's on the first page, I have a page on preserving herbs. So drying, there are two kinds of drying. There's the short dry and the long dry. You can do the short dry with dill, thyme, and rosemary. So you put the dry, you know, you put the fresh herbs on a towel-lined plate and you microwave it in bursts of 5 to 10 seconds on high for a total of 1 to 2 minutes. So you're going to need a degree in mathematics to get this short dry, but it is a way to quickly dry your herbs. So that's all in here if you want to follow along. And then the long dry, which I really think is actually easier because you're just leaving it somewhere. You can do that again with oregano, mint, sage, thyme, or rosemary. And you place those herbs on, I use like a cooling rack, a cookie sheet, you know, the racks that you use to kind of cool down your baked goods or whatever. You place that down in a sunny, kind of airy space, and you make sure they're kind of, you don't want to bunch them up. You kind of want to spread them out in one even layer. So each one has space for the air to circulate, and then you just let them air dry for 2 to 3 weeks. So once they're dry, you can pull the herbs off the stem and then store them in your clean, dry container. So there's more in here about drying herbs as well as freezing herbs. You can see here, I included a recipe for just a regular herb oil if you want to blend up some herbs with some olive oil and then freeze that. Anytime you need to use olive oil, instead of grabbing the container off the shelf, pop a cube into your pan, and then you have this nice, you know, herbaceous oil to use. You can also freeze them in water, of course. And what else did I include here? You can make pesto, or like we're going to do right now, you can make this versatile herb sauce. So let's get started with that. Before I do, Alita, was there?
Yeah, so I might have misinterpreted.
Yeah,
I might have misinterpreted her question a little bit because she's saying that she wanted to know how to use the rosemary in the recipes more so than drying.
Oh, like how to use fresh rosemary in recipes?
Yes, she has.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems that she has a
lot.
Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Okay, no, not to worry. So using fresh rosemary, I mean, rosemary is a wonderful pairing often with meats. You know, you see like a leg of lamb with rosemary, or like one of my favorite things to do very simply though is the rosemary roasted potatoes. So you could get some little baby potatoes and toss a bunch of rosemary in there, and you can just, you know, cook it like that. How else do I like to use rosemary? I like to make an herb salt with rosemary. So if you look, actually, if you look, I think I have it in here. Yes. So you take 1 to 2 cups of mixed herbs. So you would do like 1 cup of rosemary, of the leaves, with 1 cup of salt, and you process them together. And then you can use that salt to rub on chicken or meat before you roast it or you grill it. You can, you know, instead of just having your plain salt, after you blended it, the rosemary with the salt, you can just have that salt, and then you're adding a little bit of rosemary into each dish, and it just gives it that nice layer of flavor. What else? You can use it in salad dressings.
Focaccia.
Yeah, oh my gosh, pastas, focaccia. You can stick a few sprigs in your olive oil and season your, you know, just let it season your olive oil. Gosh, what else can you do with rosemary? Does anyone else have any other ideas for Denise?
Yeah, so
you want to put them in the chat, or Alita, go ahead.
yeah, so yeah, included that her mother-in-law uses rosemary to her baked dishes and pan cooking of chicken and ribs, and she says that it's supposed to be anti-inflammatory as well.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Oh, using rosemary as a stirrer in making Bloody Mary. That's a good one.
Very creative. Yep. Okay. Okay, great. Another thing that I just thought of is you could do like an apple compote with a little bit of rosemary in it as like a savory thing that you might serve with like some pork tenderloin or something like that. Yeah, great suggestions, everyone. So our soup is boiling. So I just dropped the temperature down. How did I know it was boiling? Because I saw steam started to come out the sides and edges there. So now the temperature is a little bit lower, and it's just going to simmer until that squash is really, really tender. And then we're going to blend it up, and it's done. So let's go ahead and make that herb, the herb sauce. And it's this page if you're following. I soaked walnuts. So here they are. They've been soaking overnight. You don't have to do this step, but I do find that when you soak your nuts, whether it's walnuts or cashews or almonds, it just softens them. So the sauce gets, I don't know, it gets a little bit more creamy and rich than kind of tough and nutty. But either way is, you know, you can really do either. So we have herbs, glorious herbs. We have parsley, we have cilantro. I had a bunch of mint, so I just wanted to offer that as an option as well. We have some fresh mint. We have, again, it calls for scallions. I didn't grow scallions, but I have chives, so we're gonna add those in. And this is really, really simple. Everything goes into the food processor and gets blended together. So let's actually just start by working down our herbs a little bit. So this is just, you know, this is like barely making a dent in the amount of parsley that I have in the garden here, but at least it's a nice way to preserve it. And I like this sauce because it's one of those sauces that goes with pretty much everything. So again, cooked fish, meat, chicken, tofu. What else have I done this with? Even just like steamed green beans, or if you wanted to, let's see, well, what else could you use this with? I mean, it would be fine over like, you know, warm up a can of beans and just add some, you know, there's a lot of things you could do with this sauce. Oh, that's what I wanted to say. The roasted vegetables that I often make in the fall, I just make a big tray of roasted vegetables. Well, this is a great way to add more nutrition to those frozen vegetables because you have all of these great nutrient-rich and dense herbs that are going in. So we've got our herbs in there. I just picked a little more mint. We have, again, with the garlic, I'm almost like afraid to press these now because they're so hard to press, but let's just do our best. There we go. Fearlessness in the kitchen is required of every chef, or at least a little bit of a brazen carelessness that just allows you to go for it, right? Not overthink it. Okay, got the skins off. We're going to trim the bottom, that woody, tough part. I don't want that in my sauce, although it probably would get mixed to nothing. But We're going to add a little bit of red pepper flakes. These are red pepper flakes from last year's red peppers. So I grew, with the help of our gardeners, of course, a little bit of salt. We grew these kind of long, thin, oh, actually, I think I have one here. Let me show you what we have. These long, thin red peppers. Here they are. I did it again this year. And I did the long dry method with the herbs. I sliced them open so that the air got into the inside. And then once they had dried, it took a little bit longer than a few weeks because these obviously have more moisture. But again, same technique on that cooling rack, just set them, let them dry. And then I put them into the food processor without the stems. And that was it. Just be careful when you're, doing the food processor or the blender with them or anything. When you open that, you don't want to stick your face in and smell because it's going to be like really spicy kind of molecules floating in the air. So just be careful of that. I almost forgot, we have some olive oil here. Oh, and some fresh lemon juice. So again, we're adding about a 1/4 cup, beautiful, bright, fresh lemon juice. This lemon juice has vitamin C in it. Of course, that's going to help to unlock some of the vitamins and minerals in our green leafy herbs, specifically iron. Parsley has a little iron in it, so vitamin C helps with that. And, it adds that nice bright acidity. So this is, very similar to your traditional kind of pesto, but there's no Parmesan cheese. You could add cheese if you wanted to. The reason I don't is because sometimes I have guests that don't do dairy, and it's just nice to have something that, is gluten-free, dairy-free, is a flavor booster, kind of enhancer of food, and everybody can enjoy it, and you're going to get more nutrients. All right, so let's pulse that together a little bit. And let's add in our olive oil. I do like to do this, kind of stream it in while it's running. It emulsifies it kind of nicely. Let's get a little spatula here, because when you're working with a food processor, you do have to kind of move that down. It's going to be kind of like a chunky texture. Any other questions? I think I saw something pop up there.
Valerie, she didn't have a question. She just had a comment that she will definitely use the rosemary instead of thyme with her roasted vegetables. So that's a good idea. Karen said that she used rosemary on the stem under the skin of turkey or chicken, and then she roasted. Valerie mentioned that you got to use less in some recipes because it's stronger than most other herbs, which is very true.
Yeah, be careful with your rosemary. Thank you for mentioning that.
And Denise had a question. Do you think I should put the rosemary into cheesecloth in order to get flavor, be able to remove it, as nobody likes to have to pick out the little stems?
I guess it depends on what you're putting it in. Denise. Like, it depends on what you're putting it. If you're putting it in like a soup or something, I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah.
All right, so this is done. You can see it looks a lot like pesto. And think about all those, that mountain of fresh herbs that we are putting in here. And then you can freeze this. Again, get your ice cube tray out, freeze it in your little ice cube tray. And then anytime you just want to add a wonderful, herbaceous, garlicky, summery aroma, you can. And I guess the last thing I will say is, if you're not a garlic fan, I hope for your sake you become one. But if you're not, we accept you and love you as you are. But you could just leave the garlic out, and that would be fine too. Just it will change the flavor, but it's not going to make or break the sauce, I think. So look at that, 2 cups of gorgeous, a little bit less, 1 3/4. I guess that's what I wrote in the recipe, of gorgeous sauce to be enjoyed all season long and into the next and into the next and into the next. Let's go ahead and check on our soup and our tomatoes. I think they're done. So our tomatoes, wow. So you're gonna pull these tomatoes out of the oven and think, oh my gosh, should I burn these? What's wrong with these? Why are they so dark? Well, that's the balsamic vinegar at work. So don't worry, that is all really good flavor. And then at this point, we're gonna grab our blender. I'm gonna turn the, you can enjoy these just like this if you want to. I'm gonna turn the oven off. And I think I had a set of tongs. Here they are. And we're gonna go ahead and pick up each one and pop it into the blender. You're gonna see here that I'm gonna try to kind of massage the leaves off of the stems without getting the stems in there. You may wanna do this over a plate or something. So just kind of, I'm just kind of like encouraging, gently encouraging the leaves to come off of the stems of your herbs and then throwing away the stems. It is easier to do this, I think, once they're roasted because they just kind of drop as you gently crunch them up. Okay. So you've got your herbs in there. We're going to add the rest of the tomatoes. And this recipe, you'll notice this recipe calls for a mix of tomatoes. So I'm doing, you can do San Marzano, which is really wonderful for sauce making because of the way the tomato is structured. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about tomatoes and tomato structure in a moment. But I like to mix the San Marzano with a couple of, juicy heirloom ones just to get a mix of flavors in there. San Marzano is great though. It's a really good choice. So be careful doing this. It is going to be hot. Try to get up as much of that goodness as you can. This is definitely a little bit of a process, but it's worth it. You'll see, totally worth it. Keep all that in as much as you can from the pan itself. You may even want to get a, let's see, like maybe one of these little spatulas here. Grab your sheet pan, remember that it's hot, and just kind of get all of the extra juices in that you can. Questions or comments? So far, so good. Pretty easy.
There was a question,
tomato, right?
Yeah, it looks delicious. There's a question about the herb sauce. You have instructions on how to freeze it, but how long could you keep it in the fridge?
Oh, okay, great question. So with the herb sauce, I typically recommend storing it for up to 6 months. And that's true for most, most vegetable-based things. After about 6 months, they will start to decrease in flavor. I think they don't taste as good after 6 months is up. So you certainly can keep it longer, and heaven knows I certainly do keep things maybe a little bit longer, but that's kind of the general practice in the food industry is about 6 months for any veggie thing. And then if there's like meat or fish or things like that involved, they say only up to 3 months. So
are you talking about freezing it?
Yeah, for freezing it.
So the question was, how long do you keep it in the fridge?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you put the instructions on the recipe.
Right, for freezing. Okay. Oh, good. Okay. I thought I did. I was like, so if you're going to enjoy it straight from the fridge, I mean, you can keep this in the fridge for about a week or so. It may start to brown. So what I recommend is sort of doing what Denise's trick is, having that like layer of plastic wrap that's pressing right up. I mean, it's like the same as a pesto, sort of the same thing, that it might start to brown after a few days. So yeah, you just want to keep that in mind, that that it will start to discolor a bit if you don't keep it airtight. But yeah, I'd say 3 days in the fridge and then freezer, for longer. Okay, so let's blend this up. Gorgeous. Okay. And I just want to show you the texture of this. It's actually quite thick already. Let's say this is pretty thick. See, it's got this like really nice chunky thickness to it. Smells really good. And again, you can use this as you would any regular, tomato sauce. If you wanted to make it thicker, you could cook it down a little bit longer. If you wanted to turn it into tomato paste, it practically almost is a tomato paste already. It's quite thick because I didn't use that many of the juicier tomatoes. I used mostly the San Marzano ones, but you can see How pretty, right? So this is our gorgeous tomato paste sauce coulis thing that you can, oh my gosh, it smells really good. So let's give this blender a quick rinse. Let's blend up the soup. And then I want to talk to you all a little bit about tomatoes because they have a really interesting history and they have a really interesting anatomy and flavor structure, which makes them, you know, a little bit closer to a vegetable than what we expect of a fruit, because it's botanically, it is a fruit. So let's talk about that. Let's finish up our soup here. See if everything's nice and soft. I'm just going to dip my knife in to see. Squash is still a little tough. So you know what? I'm going to let that cook for a few more minutes. Just let it go a little bit longer, and then we'll blend it up. But briefly on tomatoes. Tomatoes started out as these really small bitter berries that grew in bushes in the West Coast deserts of South America. And today, after their domestication in Mexico, they came from the Aztec term for plum fruit. Tomatel was the original name for a tomato, and there was even a period in Europe where people were quite suspicious of tomatoes, and that lasted until well into the 19th century. They are now eaten all over the world in a great variety of sizes and shapes and colors. And in the US, they are second vegetable in popularity, second only to, I bet you can all guess, the potato. So number one is the potato, number two is the tomato. So what accounts for their great appeal? Why have tomatoes gained so much popularity? So these really sweet, tart fruits are treated as a vegetable. And I think the answer to their popularity really lies in their unique flavor. In addition to their relative low sugar content for a fruit, they only have about 3% compared to other fruits. They're more similar in sugar content to like a cabbage or Brussels sprouts, as well as they have these specific sulfur compounds that create, it's called savory glutamic acid. And that, in addition to these sulfur compounds, makes them taste and feel a little bit more like a vegetable. The glutamic acid is way more common in meats, actually. That's where we see them from a sciencey kind of food chemistry standpoint. We usually find that more in our meats, which is why tomatoes are really predisposed to complement the flavor of meats and even replace the flavor of meats. Certainly they add a lot of depth to dishes, a lot of complexity to sauces and other mixed preparations. So you can use tomatoes to kind of give foods that kind of rich, meaty flavor without having to rely on meat for that. So briefly about tomatoes' anatomy and flavor. There are some very dry paste varieties, but aside from that, most tomatoes have 4 different kinds of tissue. They have a thin, kind of tough cuticle skin, which is on the outside, and sometimes that's removed. They have what's called the outer fruit wall, this central pith, and then this semi-liquid kind of jelly and juice that surround the seeds. The wall tissue of the tomato contains most of the sugar and most of the amino acids, while the concentration of the acids and the kind of tangy part, that's going to be more in the jelly and in the juice part of the tomato. So most of the aroma compounds are really found in the exterior parts of the tomato. So yeah, so I guess when you slice a tomato, the flavor of that really depends on the proportions of these different tissues of the tomato. Who knew there were so many, right? Okay, and the last thing I'll say about tomatoes is that the ones that are allowed to fully ripen on the vine accumulate more sugar and acid and aroma compounds. So that's why they have the fullest flavor. An important element of these vine ripened tomatoes, there's a flavor compound, and I can never say it correctly. It's called furanol, Furanol. E-O-L. And that resembles kind of a sweet and savory caramel kind of a flavor. And that is higher in tomatoes that are vine ripened than the ones that are, most supermarket tomatoes, which are picked and then shipped while they're still green. And they're artificially stimulated to redden by treating them with ethylene gas. And that's how they get that kind of red color and have a little bit of that ripey fruit flavor. So it's definitely the end of tomato season, so enjoy it. This is the moment for it. When it comes to cooking tomatoes and kind of breaking them down, often people will make tomato sauce from canned tomatoes. That's fine, but the fresh tomatoes, as you can see, they really readily cook down and they get into this really nice smooth puree. Many canned tomatoes won't do that. That's because canners frequently add calcium salts to firm the cell walls and to keep the tomatoes from the pieces intact and to keep them from falling apart. So that can actually interfere with their disintegration. So that's why if you're making if you want to make a fine textured dish from canned tomatoes, just check the label, make sure that the brand doesn't list calcium among the ingredients, because otherwise it's not going to break down in the way that you want it to. And then when you're storing tomatoes, let's say you went to the market or whatever, originally, tomatoes come from a warm climate, so they don't like to be put in the refrigerator. They kind of tense up in there and they hold on to all their juices, and they, so they're not going to be as, their flavor is going to suffer if you put them in the refrigerator. So keep them out on the counter and enjoy them as soon as you get them. Okay, we're going to blend up our sauce. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, our soup. We already blended our sauce. That time flew by. My goodness. I had more about tomatoes to say than I thought I did. All right, so we're going to transfer this to the blender. I'm just going to pop down a towel here so I don't completely melt my cutting board. It's useful to have like a little measuring cup to do this. This blender is a heat-proof blender, meaning that you can blend things in it that are super hot like this. If your blender is not heat-proof, you're going to want to wait a while. You're going to want to wait for this soup to cool down until it's, at least it's just warm and it's not scalding hot, because blenders that aren't designed to handle heat, they're actually going to create a vacuum, and therefore you might have a little soup explosion in your kitchen. Okay, there it is. Perfect. A little escapee. We'll blend this up. And I always like to put, I call it the security blanket, on top of the blender, just in case anybody decides to try to make a run for it. And we're just going to let the blender do its magic, make it nice and creamy and smooth. You could probably leave this chunky if you wanted to. I'm sure it would be, good. I just like the creamy golden kind of effect. Okay. And then if you're adding milk or cream to this, I have a little bit here, I can do this later, but you would add it in this, basically in this stage. So look how beautiful the color is. Golden, golden, golden. I'm actually even going to take some of my herb sauce that I just made, pop that right on top, stir that in for a little extra flavor, and voila, you've got season of summer in, can you imagine it's a cold winter day and you get to sit down and eat this? Like, that is just as good as it gets. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, for your great participation, for your questions. If you have anything, like you mentioned, Denise, you have a ton of rosemary. If you're trying to figure out, what do I do with all of this X, and we didn't talk about it today, feel free to send me an email. I'd be happy to think about it with you and kind of hash out some ideas of what you can do with all of your abundance of whatever it is you have. And then finally, we have a class tomorrow. We're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, which started on, I think, September 15th and goes until mid-October. So I'm really looking forward to that class. We're going to have one of my colleagues, his name is Pedro. He's from Colombia, and he's going to be talking a little bit about what it was like growing up in Colombia, some of his favorite foods, some of the staples of Colombian cuisine. So please come on back, join me for that tomorrow. It's at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Alita, for moderating. Any final questions, comments? I know we're a bit behind, so.
There's a question about a Ziv and a food milk, but I answered in the chat because I do use both of them extensively.
Yeah, thank you.
But there was a question about the pickling. I guess at some point maybe you should do a pickling class because they did have questions.
Thank you. Yes. So thank you for bringing that up. I actually did. It's hard to do a pickling class because you don't really get to see the results of your pick. Well, I guess we could probably figure that out. But I did include on the last page of the packet some really detailed instructions on lactofermentation and pickling the old-fashioned way. So feel free to read through that. And yeah, hopefully this can help guide you a little bit on your pickling adventures. And good luck.
And lots of thank yous. So lots of people saying thank you very much and that they love the recipe. So
great. Well, thank you. Hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy the very last day of summer, the very first day of fall, wherever you are. There you are. So